It was just very recently where I realized just how much I value a good atmosphere in a video game. Atmosphere is a key aspect, always in the background, enhancing the experience, but I never really focused on it. However, observing it in some games where I like it better or more made me realize just how important that component is in making the game memorable and always fun to revisit, even if it's not the best gameplay wise. There are a lot of games with incredible atmospheres. One of my favorite games of all time, of course being Hollow Knight, it's absolutely amazing. Demon's Souls, specifically the OG in the Tower of Latria, absolutely amazing, one of the best atmospheres I've ever seen in a game. And last but not least, Mortal Shell, a 2020 Souls-like. It doesn't have the best gameplay, but the atmosphere is incredible and it alone makes me really love the game. However, there is this one game that also happens to be basically my favorite game of all time, also happens to be my favorite Soulsborne game of all time, and it's called Bloodborne. Bloodborne has by far the best atmosphere in a video game I have ever seen. And today I want to talk about just that, atmosphere in Bloodborne and how it builds the horror and tension. Today I want to focus on this specific topic because I never really saw someone talking about it in detail, and I really just enjoyed it in my recent playthrough of this game. With Shadow of the Erdtree just around the corner, I'm very sure Elden Ring will probably take my #1 spot from From Software Souls game roster. However, Bloodborne will always be peak and one of the best games of all time because it's a one-of-a-kind experience with a unique world, lore, amazing areas, character design, creature design, and just overall feel of the game. And today I want to explore one of the main reasons why I feel that way. With all this said, let's get into the video. Music is obviously a very important part of video games. It can make for some of the most memorable moments in the entire game, or a lack of music can make for a very special tone and atmosphere. Before I get into my picks, I want to say I'm no musical expert at all, like I have no idea about music theory. However, I'm just going to describe how these songs impact my experience and the feel I get while playing this game. There are mostly two ways From Software uses music in their games. For areas, pretty rarely, besides in Elden Ring and Sekiro for ambience, and especially for boss fights. The lack of music in most areas can make for a very dead atmosphere and make the areas where music is actually played stand out. The best example of this would be the soothing hymn in the Upper Cathedral Ward and my favorite atmospheric track of all time, Hail the Nightmare in Yahar'gul, if should you visit it early. These two make the areas even more memorable than they would have been without it, in my opinion. While Hail the Nightmare makes Yahar'gul seem very ominous and mysterious, soothing hymn in the Upper Cathedral Ward isn't soothing at all, it's terrifying and it makes for one of the most tense experiences in the entire game. It's a claustrophobic area and the background music conveys that perfectly. For music in boss fights, it can add to the flow of the fight or set the entire atmosphere. An example of a track where it sets the atmosphere would be the Witches of Hemwick. The witches get more mechanics the further you advance in the fight, and that is conveyed through the soundtrack. The fight just starts with some of these shadow beasts roaming around the area and one witch hiding, not even really defending herself besides the rare occasional AoE. But if you progress in the fight and especially kill one witch, there are actually two witches, they get revived, they start shooting their grab attacks, and it just gets way more intense towards phase 2, and the same thing applies for a soundtrack. It's not one of Bloodborne's greatest, but I still think it's a very good one. An example of a soundtrack that perfectly contributes to the feel and the flow of the fight would be Ludwig's second phase. The soundtrack is my favorite in the entire series, and in phase 2 it can even sync up with his moonlight projectile slashes, which is probably one of the most epic moments in the entire game. But there is one fight that comes to my mind as the first thing when I think about music in boss fights, and that would be the Bloodstarved Beast. The Bloodstarved Beast soundtrack is a pretty good horror soundtrack. It's not the most unique soundtrack that exists, but it's perfect for the fight. It sets the tone perfectly when you enter this broken down church, and it just flows perfectly with the fight. The difference between fighting the Bloodstarved Beast with and without the soundtrack is insanely apparent, and the music makes the boss even seem more dangerous and terrifying than it actually is, because it's an early game boss. However, this is not the only noteworthy soundtrack I want to mention. One of my favorite soundtracks in the entire series, German, is also just very different from the entire game. Through this dark gothic city, you fight these monstrosities, eldritch abominations, and so on, and they have very fitting and awesome, amazing tracks. However, German's track is not really that. It's not filled with horror, it's just this very sad, depressing soundtrack with violence, and I just absolutely love it. It's a perfect contrast to the entire game and makes German stand out even so much more, besides obviously the arena and everything else surrounding it. It's just one of the best moments in gaming for me. Bloodborne is my favorite soundtrack of all time, and it does so much for me. However, contributing to the atmosphere is one of the biggest reasons why. Cutscenes are a commonly used tool in video games to convey the story or build up moments, and this is the same with Bloodborne. Cutscenes can make for some of the coolest moments in video games, and Bloodborne is no exception to that. There are mostly two kinds of cutscenes in Bloodborne. There are the cutscenes in the areas. Basically, if you enter area, it shows you the new place, or it shows you where to go. And then there are the cutscenes for boss fights. Some bosses even get mid-fight cutscenes, like my second favorite boss in the series. However, some bosses only get an introduction cutscene and transfer just mid-game. And of course, there are also bosses with lack of cutscene, and I will talk about all of those. I really don't have too much to say about the area cutscenes. They're nice, I like them, but they just serve as a bridge or as a loading screen, like for example when you enter Cathedral Ward. However, the boss cutscenes are very special. I want to talk about some of my favorites. One of my favorite cutscenes in the game is the Orphan of Kos cutscene. The Orphan of Kos crawling out of Kos' body, oh my god, so many Kos, or some say Kos, is just really gross and disgusting, and the squish sound design also supports that. And this baby crawls out, and the first thing it does is look at the nightmarish sky and cry. It sets up the tone perfectly, and it works so well with the Phase 1 soundtrack. Then there is Logarius, another one of my favorites. He just sits on a chair like a skeleton, been there so long that his bones are frozen, and when he's standing up, you hear the bones cracking. The sound design is perfect, just listen to it. I really love this and I appreciate this so much. Some other great cutscenes would be Gascoigne as a blood-drunk hunter slaying the beast, Amelia praying and trying to hold on to her humanity, but ultimately transforming as well, and of course the moon presence descending down and either enslaving the player or being repelled. All these cutscenes are perfect for setting the tone. However, I need to talk about my favorite boss in Bloodborne, of course, and he also has the best cutscenes. Ludwig has one of the best first cutscenes I've ever seen. When you enter this area filled with blood, you encounter the most disgusting and grotesque beast in the entire game. Saying Ludwig looks disgusting would be an understatement. And yeah, he acts like that for Phase 1. He's probably my favorite beast boss, and it's just perfect. It's everything the cutscene promised. However, once you down him and get him to Phase 2, the way the cutscene is shot and angled, he doesn't look that terrifying and disgusting anymore. He looks more like a man, and that's who he is in Phase 2. You're fighting the proud hunter Ludwig once was. And obviously, the you were at my side all along cutscene is probably one of the most beloved cutscenes in the series, and it's hard to disagree. It's my favorite as well, and it's probably the best mid cutscene I've ever seen. Elden Ring has some close contenders, but nothing quite on this level. I want to finish this segment of the video by talking about bosses without a cutscene. And my two favorites in this category would be Rom and Ebriedes. Rom is amazing because you jump down into this arcane lake, and it's just such a big environmental change compared to the rest of the game that it completely threw me off. And probably my favorite fight with this is Ebriedes. You enter this huge cave-like arena behind the Grand Cathedral basically, and you see this weeping great one just there, and she will not even notice or attack you until you begin to hack away. The cutscenes in this game are just great. They contribute so much and make for some of the most iconic moments in the series. I love the Bloodborne cutscenes. Last but definitely not least, I want to talk about the gameplay and the atmosphere and environment in the Bloodborne world. First, I will talk about the atmosphere. I just want to talk about my favorite places in this game and how they feel. First off, the starting area, Central Yharnam. This is a living city that is basically thrown into utter chaos. You can see people patrolling the streets, you can talk to scared or confused citizens within their houses, and it's still a city that was definitely operating. However, now it's in utter chaos. It's not a dead city yet. The dead city is the next area in the game, Old Yharnam. This city was burned to cinders and is now only patrolled by beasts. I love how the mist creates those moments where the beasts emerge from it. It's awesome and terrifying. It's one of the most horror-filled atmospheres, and it even has a jump scare in a Souls game, and I genuinely jumped back when I first saw it. It was amazing. Then there is Yahar'gul, and I love Yahar'gul because you can actually visit it in 3 different ways. You can either visit it before you defeat Amelia, so basically around evening time. You can visit it after Amelia, basically at night time, or you will have to visit it after Rom, after you trigger the blood moon. And in contrast to being just patrolled by the Snatchers mostly and dogs, it's now housing some of the most terrifying creatures in the entire game, and the amygdala are everywhere. More on them later. Then there is the Forbidden Woods, which is basically the area after Cathedral Ward, which is just a really nice change of place because you mostly go through cities in this game, which is a good thing. I love the cities. Yeah, it's just a great forest area. What I really like about this area that it mostly uses enemies from the first half of the game, mainly the citizens, but slowly and gradually builds up towards the eldritch horror that is soon to ensue after you defeat Rom. You encounter the first emissaries in this area, for example. It's really great. Obviously, I need to talk about the Upper Cathedral Ward, aka the part where Bloodborne turns from a Souls game into a horror game. It's perfect, it's claustrophobic, you have to navigate these narrow corridors and dodge the brain suckers attacks. It's great, and the atmosphere music is tense. It's a very, very good area. And then I need to talk about the Nightmare Realms. They all feel nightmarish, especially the Nightmare of Menses. Seeing all these spiders, the landscapes, it's just, Nightmare is just the best way to describe it, and it couldn't be better. And of course, I need to talk about the DLC areas, all 3 of them perfect. The never-ending hunt in the Hunter's Nightmare, all these blood-drunk hunters being caught in the cycle of hunting beasts for all eternity. The terrifying and oppressive research hall where experiments of all kinds are conducted and patients begging to be finally released. It's very disturbing and terrifying. And that's the last area of the DLC, and probably my second favorite area in the entire series, the Fishing Hamlet. The introduction alone is perfect. After you defeat Maria, you enter this ominous looking village, and the first thing you hear is this guy cursing the hunters who massacred and destroyed this village. You see a corpse being hung up in the form of the hunter's mark, and you see what these hunters did to this place. The enemies are perfection. They all look perfectly fitting to this area. It's really weird to describe. On one hand, this is one of the most gruesome areas and sights in the entire game. On the other hand, it has some absolutely beautiful moments, like seeing the beach or the rain falling down. So it's just a really memorable area, and it's also impossible to not think of Pirates of the Caribbean while going through this. I love this area so much, and the atmosphere is yet to be replicated. But not only the atmosphere is stunning, Bloodborne also has superb environments and enemy and creature designs. My favorite thing about environments is how Bloodborne uses gore. It's always used as an effective tool for horror and never just for a cheap shock value. Like for example in Ludwig's cave. Do you think Ludwig's introduction would be as memorable if he was just in a cave without all the blood? I don't think so. And that's why I really love how Bloodborne uses gore. It's there with a purpose. Also, enemy and creature design is also just perfection. As I mentioned, around the midpoint, the game shifts from Victorian and Gothic horror to Eldritch cosmic horror. We go from vampires, werewolves, and stuff like the Cleric Beast to amazing grade 1 alien designs like Ebrieras, Amygdala, and stuff like that. It's very, very well done, and those two just blend in perfectly. But the gameplay also kind of reflects the horror a bit. For one, there would be the insight mechanic. Depending on your insight count, you can see things earlier than you're supposed to. For example, the Amygdala. Or sometimes you can hear the baby cry. They even have this very cool idea where enemies, here the church hunters, get new attacks or appear to begin with here in Hamvik, depending on your insight count, which I just really appreciate, and I think it's really, really cool. I would also argue the claustrophobic design and jump scares like in Old Yharnam are also gameplay horror features. So Bloodborne definitely has this theme and this intention woven into every part of the game. What can I say? I have played a lot of great games with insanely awesome atmospheres, Lords of the Fallen and the Umbral Realm, a lot of Lies of P areas, the Souls series in general, Hollow Knight. However, Bloodborne will still probably stand out as my favorite. All the components and parts create this delicately crafted experience and seamless transfer from normal Souls gameplay to very tense horror gameplay at times. It's truly impressive. Bloodborne will always be one of my favorite games, and the atmosphere and horror in this game is one of the big reasons why. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to like, subscribe and support the channel. It helps out massively and I appreciate all of you watching this video. If you have something cool to add or discuss, please be sure to comment down below. I love discussing my favorite games and I hope to see all of you soon in the next video. Until then, bye!